Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to EIG's 28th webinar, Discovering Risk Appetite to Drive Your Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency 90-Day Action Plan, utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning. Welcome to our 28th webinar, Discovering that Risk Appetite for you. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today to attend our webinar and building our evolving resilient enterprise, especially in light of the coronavirus pandemic restrictions. We hope that your family is healthy and safe. This is the third of the supply chain risk and resiliency webinars on the 90-day action plan. The first of the series provided an overview of the online supply chain risk and resiliency 90-day action plan. And the second focused on the maturity model. And today we will focus on risk appetite. And the fourth webinar coming up in May will focus on operational propensity. So again, we look forward to your participation in the webinar. There will be some polling questions, and please do join the poll EV if you could, and it is in the chat window. My name is Jim Vries, and we are Enhanced International Group, and we are a platform of 40 plus consulting companies and SaaS solution providers dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce to expand and sustain your organization. Our goal is to provide collaborative experience, thought leadership to enable organizations to deliver self-sustaining, positive margin growth, the competitive advantage in delivering 90-day action plans. We hope you find that the information is informative to you and your teams, and we welcome your questions and comments in the chat window at any time. And please have your cell phone handy and or another device to participate in the poll. We're organized under people, process, data, and technology. Today we'll be focusing on process with supply chain risk and resiliency. Our upcoming webinar again is May 11th, the fourth in the series of this particular topic. On April 27th, we will be focusing on video to insight in our artificial intelligence webinar series. And then on April 29th, we will focus on digital twins for Industry 4.0. And then on May 4th, we return to the new product introduction series and focus on the handoff between agile sprints and the phase gate discipline. So our past webinars are free and available on the EIG website, consultingeig.com. Today, we're fortunate to have with us the original founders of Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency, Greg Schlegel, founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. Greg is a celebrated speaker and an esteemed author of his book, Supply Chain Risk Management, an Emerging Discipline. Greg?
Jim, great to be with you and the folks on the call. The consortium, quick thumbnail sketch. The consortium is a group of 30 companies, up to about 1,500 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. We bring tools, techniques, tactics, methodologies, and solutions that help us as a consortium identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks for our clients. I teach supply chain risk management at Lehigh University, and I do teach ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, at Villanova. So great to be here with you to talk about our passion, and today's passion is risk appetite.
Great, Greg, thank you. And again, just a kind reminder to please join the pollev.com, and Greg will kick us off with the agenda.
You bet. It looks like this. We'll start our discussion with something called Vuca, the Vuca world we live in, and we'll give you a sense of the impetus behind this tool, just to get you grounded. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the 90-day assessment. We'll give you an overview. Remember, the 90-day assessment is 90-day action plan, answering 90 questions in about 20-some minutes. All right. Next, we'll do a deep dive. We'll get into the risk appetite. As Jim said, this is, I think, the third of 4 essential webinars covering this topic. And so this is a deep dive into one of the detailed graphics and insights that you receive from this report and its risk appetite. So we'll dig into that today. We'll end up the discussion with some compelling reasons to act from our point of view, and we'll discuss what do you get and what our ask is in terms of how do you get that value prop. Remember, at the moment we're in beta, so we're offering this tool at $500 US. The tool is actually valued at about $3,500. So we'll talk about that again. We'll finish that up and we'll give you some more insight at the end. That's what our agenda looks like. All right, we said we'd start our discussion on the VUCA world we live in. So let's take a look. What is VUCA? Well, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So what's volatility? Think of it, this describes something that is liable to change or change very quickly and often for the worst. I'm basically talking about the world of COVID-19, government mandates, and on and on and on for the last 12 to 14 months. Next, uncertainty. This is the state of not knowing or being able to rely on something. And this essentially conjures up all the demand shocks, all the supply shocks in our operations, in our supply chains, again, from government mandates and on and on. Next, complexity. This can be defined as something with many, many parts in an intricate arrangement. And this, folks, is our global supply chains. We know they're complex. And the last element, ambiguity. Something that is ambiguous, if it is, and if it's often more than one interpretation, and you could just take all the elements we just described above, and this is our VUCA world. So with that as a backdrop, I'll pass it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. So as we look at what's happening in the world of COVID-19, we can see that from this chart from John Hopkins that in essence, for the US, we've kind of plateaued, although we're increasing a little bit. When you dig down, you see that India has seen a greater increase, and the top 5 countries are US, Brazil, Turkey, France, and Poland, as far as death rates. In the US, the vaccine rollout is moving, in a positive direction. And as we continue to try to achieve our goal of 4th of July with family and friends, recent developments have included the J&J vaccine being halted. And, that's an event. And the good thing is, though, we are gaining positive momentum in the US, but we're not completely out of the woods. We certainly have come off from our highs back in the early first quarter. But we are starting to encounter quite a number of impacts due to the bullwhip effect that we bring up in our 3 R's that Greg will talk about in a few minutes about supply demand imbalances. For a while now, we've been talking about the computer chips and automobiles, in addition to boats, homes, furniture, appliances, and major electronics that are in short supply. The latest prediction is that now we're going to have a toilet paper shortage coming to the high demand of shipping containers that may clog the supply chain. So we're having some dynamic times as we will continue to have as the supply demand balance tries to find a new norm. The markets are coming to terms with this new normal and to become stable and predictable, but there's going to be quite a bit more volatility. The good news, the job market did rebound in the first quarter here, but it's fairly plateaued, but it's hopeful that it will start increasing, and this comes from the conference board. Greg?
You bet. We said we'd talk about the impetus. What was the impetus to develop this tool? We have a couple. First, the big elephant in the room, COVID-19 pandemic. What you're going to see in the next couple of slides, we, Jim and I, in the consortium, began to put things together back in April of 2020. That seems like a decade ago, but really only 12 months. The big elephant in the room was the pandemic. Also, we thought the McKinsey report, which they're doing some very, very good analyses and studies in the world of supply chain resiliency, we thought this was pretty good back in November of 2020, where it sums up the essential, the landscape we've been living in for the last 12 to 15 months. The COVID-19 pandemic, once again, driven home the necessity of managing operational and supply chain risks, amen. It has catapulted these issues to the top of CEOs' agendas, and the unexpected in supply chain now has to be considered probable. There's more. We basically said in April of 2020, because we are an education organization, we used to do 25 workshops around the world every year with all our partners. Those face-to-face workshops are tempered at the moment, and the inability for us as educators and consultants to sit with companies and lead, guide, direct, and coach them within their own company hallways, that went by the wayside. And last, the staggering and uneven negative impact of the pandemic on manufacturers due to, and we say this, artificial demand and supply shocks. And we've articulated a lot of the dollar value impacts across multiple industries if you've been sitting in on previous webinars, and or you could also go to EIG and listen to the webinar. We've articulated some very ugly financial impacts across multiple industries in previous webinars. So additional impetus for the tool. This is a picture image, top right is a picture image we're going to talk about in a minute about our 3 R's and the bullwhip effect. Down on the bottom is what's called the Institute of Risk Management. They're out of the UK. They are a pure risk education organization. We partner with them. They shared with us a worldwide survey in April across, I think, something like 1,800 chief risk officers, not supply chain folks, chief risk officers in a finance mode across multiple industries. I think it was about 120 companies or more, but I thought it was very interesting. Immediate impact of COVID-19, and we wanted to share that with you over on the left-hand side. The red basically is a major impact to companies who answered the survey. Blue is significant, green is somewhat. Let's just go top down and talk about them. Rapid changes in objectives and work, but of course. Next, delays in projects, sure. Delays in hiring talent, absolutely. Distraction from key objectives, understandable. Loss of sales, revenue, and orders due to the demand shocks, and the supply shocks. Positive reputational opportunity. Let's take a pause here. In the pure risk environment, chief risk officers are taught and advocate that one company's risk event is another company's risk opportunity. That's what they mean by that. This is a pure chief risk officer answering the surveys. That's what they mean. Couple others, problems with suppliers, yipper. Staff absences due to sickness, that continues. Contractor issues, yes, if you use contract manufacturers or contractors coming in to maintain your facilities. And then on the bottom of the list was cybersecurity. So we thought this was pretty compelling. And we in April also saw this report, which has many, many more statistics and another impetus to develop the online tool. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks. And this leads us to the first question for polling is, what risk events have you encountered in the past 12 or 18 months? So we ask you to enter those in. We appreciate the folks that have already started us off with some chronic risks and issues. Suppliers, I'm gathering. So please use an underscore between your word phrases so that we can gain your feedback here. It's interesting. What I've seen is in the beginning of the pandemic, there weren't many cyber issues, and then they picked up and they seem to return to their old frequency that we were encountering, and then we're starting to see some other risks, risk events occurring out there. So we have some chronic issues, some suppliers, delivery, any risk sources of events that come to your mind that you've encountered out there would be greatly appreciated. Supply shortages, yeah. So we're starting to see that bullwhip effect of certain products not meeting the demand because all of a sudden the demand's returning, but the supply is not there. So that's that tug of war that we'll expect to keep going on until things level out a bit. Any other comments, Greg, what you see?
No, I think, again, we appreciate the contribution. It goes across the board, folks. We're not surprised. We have tried to give you a sense of what can happen, but it is, no one's immune, and everyone's supply chain across all sectors are being impacted every day.
And there was a Suez Canal blockage there. That was an event that could affect some folks, and they say it will affect other folks for months to come. So thanks for your participation there. Very, very insightful.
Yep. Good. In fact, I think we're ready to move into just giving you an overview, and I think Jim's going to give you our one-page overview of the entire process of the assessment tool. Jim? Thanks,
Greg. So yes, we have our 90-day action plan development approach, and it is all online and virtual, all discussions. We wanted to do this so that would minimize the amount of time you would invest in this effort, but provide you the greatest value. And then it is all based on virtual onboarding, collaboration, and coaching sessions virtual. So we want to provide you those benefits without having to go out of your way. And what you'll get out of that is, first of all, you get where are you from a maturity perspective, what we covered in our last webinar on where you are today and where you'd want to be. And then who are you, which we'll cover today, your risk appetite of your organization, how you look at risk in making decisions, and then how do you operate? What's your operational propensity on how you make decisions, and not just make decisions, but closer to the culture of your organization. And that culminates into this 90-day action plan, which is, this is a very high level overview of the 90-day action plan. The nice thing about what we'll do for you in filling out this questionnaire is we will provide you that prescriptive approach that will fit you and your organization from our experience. So it kicks off with this, you assigning a designated lead with an onboarding call for 1 hour. We like to see a cross-sectional view of your stakeholders. We actually like to see a minimum of 3 to 5, up to like to see really 5 to 8 stakeholders of supply chain, finance, marketing, logistics, operations. We want to see all the folks that are making these supply chain risk and resiliency questions across your organization, so those key leadership positions. And then what we'll do is, once it's filled out, we will provide this 90-day action plan report for you, a guidebook, and then we will have checkpoint calls starting off first with a review of the 90-day action plan report that we send you, and then check-in calls every 30 days, 3 more of those, and making sure that what we gave you was feasible for you and your organization to move yourself forward on your supply chain risk and resiliency journey. So that's the program. We feel it's a very rapid way to get yourself started and going. Greg?
You bet. We said we'd talk a little bit about what we call the W-like recovery and the 3 Rs. So we put this profile together, Jim and I, back in April, as I said, when we were formulating our opinion about going forward with a tool and all the impetus that we shared with you. I'll go through very quickly and articulate the X and Y axes, and also give you a flavor, a thumbnail sketch of each of the 3 phases, or the 3 Rs. So to us, this picture going forward looks to us like a continuum, all right? And on the top of the slide, from left to right, are the government mandates, okay? All right, the artificial demand supply shocks. On the y-axis on the left of the graph is our segmentation of the global supply and demand arena. And we'll give you a thumbnail sketch here. On the top left, we have the over-demand and under-supply dilemma, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In the middle, we have our baseline, which is really supply and demand in relative balance. Wouldn't we love to have that today? And on the bottom left of the y-axis is a under-demand and oversupply dilemma that we're all wrestling with. And then finally, on the bottom x-axis, we have our perspective regarding the business responses to the artificial demand and supply shocks. So that gives you the grounding. And now let's talk about the 3 Rs. On the left, the first R is respond. This is during the lockdown. And now we're going through several surges again. During the lockdown initially, the government requirements for PPE, the personal protection equipment, posed several hardships on many suppliers in the healthcare materials arena, causing what? An unbelievable over-demand situation and an undersupply. So these suppliers initially in this sector had to quickly rescale their supply chains. The secondary effect in this phase was essentially in sectors other than the healthcare, they ultimately had an under demand and an oversupply issue. This led to an approach of evaluating their product portfolios, those are stock keeping units, and reducing the marginal products, even stop producing those marginal products, and potentially furloughing personnel. Why? To maintain cash. In a crisis like this, cash is king. It's a red line issue. If you can't produce cash, you don't have a business. Second R, recovery. Again, now the government reopening, and the second, third, and fourth reopening are now manifesting themselves into another over demand, under supply of PPE products around the globe for those companies who reinvented their portfolios to produce new products like PPE, which they were not producing, like 3M and Ford, all right, for the new health care demand and channels. And in sectors other than healthcare in this phase, the reopening has caused and is still causing demand and supply imbalance for those companies who have been closed for months and or struggling to maintain their product volume, such as hand wipes, toilet paper, as Jim mentioned, and onward. And the last R, renew. All sectors in this arena will have to look hard at their product portfolios, continue to reinvent their product portfolios, continue to rescale their supply chains to deal with the existing and new customers and channels, coined the new normal. So as this continuum progresses, folks, it tends to still look to us like a W-like recovery because of the supply-demand shocks and the inherent latency in our supply chains to rebalance. And therefore, we think we're all going to be experiencing this bullwhip effect for a good portion of 2021. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And again, if you have questions or comments, please enter them in the chat. And we're going to move on to the next polling question on where do you feel your organization resides in these three phases? I see one person already responded. And of course, the three phases are respond, recover, and renew. So please go ahead and start entering your choice there. And if you have any comments, feel free to enter them in the Q&A chat so we can share them and discuss them. So 50-50. 50-50 in respond, a little bit more in recover. That's interesting.
It's encouraging.
Yeah, I think the government lockdowns, the surges in COVID-19, we're getting more of those surges. Then there's a lockdown, or there isn't a lockdown. Does that slow things down? How does that affect the market? What's the right decision to make there? I think all the governors have different opinions on that, as we know. So that causes a little volatility from state to state and across the world, of course. There's a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm taking a look. I'm not sure I see it, Jim. I didn't see
Looks
it.
like maybe just testing the system.
Okay.
It looks like they just typed a letter A.
Oh, okay. All right. Yep. Just trying to be attentive.
Yeah. So how long we'll be in respond versus in recovery? You might say that some would make an argument we're going to be in respond until we're able to, reduce the fatalities, and there's enough vaccines out there for everyone, and that may be in July or something when we start to say, okay, now we're ready for recovery, because we don't know what the new normal is. We don't know, do we need PPE in the future? Will there be 30% or 80% of America using PPE? The rest of the world uses PPE to face coverings pre-COVID. You know, how many Americans are going to be using it after they have vaccines? It'll be a very interesting thing to see. And I don't know if anybody really knows the answer to that, and then how it's going to affect everything else. Greg, your thoughts?
No, it's going to be we stick to our guns. It will be a W-like recovery across multiple industry sectors, and you know we get close to several different sectors, and the bullwhip, the actual sine cosine wave, if you want to call it that, it is totally different. The amplitude, the length, and so forth, it's totally different across every single sector, folks. That's the real frustrating element in supply chain. Because if you're a company and you actually address, produce, and sell through different channels, through different sectors, if you're a conglomerate, a large organization, it's frustrating. And it will be that way for a good long time. That's our story in terms of 2021.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everyone for your participation. I think we'll move on to the next section.
Yep, you bet. We said we'd do a little deeper dive for you and get into some basic deeper elements of what we call the risk appetite persona associated with this total tool process. And so we'd like to move into that with you now. Why, and a little levity here, why is risk management hard, folks? Supply chain is not easy. Trust me, I've been a 30-year practitioner in several Fortune 100s. You always have supply and demand imbalance. It's just a matter of degree. But why is risk management in supply chain very hard and difficult? Because of this, folks. It's called risk perspective. I show you this and let you a little levity here in the afternoon. All right. What is this? In risk management, folks, it's all about perspective. All right. And we're going to talk, Jim's going to talk more about what drives risk perspectives in a minute. But we thought we'd start here with a little levity based on perspective. Okay. And so, and because of risk appetite in the definition. So let's go to the definition. We're using McKinsey's risk report as of 2017. I will tell you that if you subscribe or can capture some of the most recent McKinsey risk reports, they're doing a terrific job of articulating all the elements that you're learning about today and what we advocate in our workshops, in our online courses, and what is resident in this tool. Here's what the risk profession, not supply chain, the risk profession has to say about a risk appetite, all right? It's the aggregate level and types of risk a board of directors and management are willing to assume to achieve its strategic objectives and business plan, consistent with what? Applicable capital, liquidity, and other regulatory requirements. Now that's a long, broad definition, but essentially we've simplified it to say this.
Sorry.
If you will, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah.
The net, folks, risk appetite is culture. All right. It truly is. That's why it's so difficult. And we have another little set of levity slide for you, if you will. This is the legendary management guru. What does he say about culture? Take a look. culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's why risk management in supply chain is so difficult, because it's dealing with opinions, culture, perspectives, and on and on and on. It's a lot more, it's much more ethereal and emotional than supply chain, good supply chain management practices with a hard ROI. That's what we see. And with that, I will move it over to, we have another one, I'm sorry, yep, my mistake. Before Jim gets into a little more detail, we'd like to talk about just giving you the grounding of the risk appetite chart profile. So I'll describe the X and the Y axes, and then Jim will go in and do a detailed discussion about the perspectives and the tactics. So on the Y-axis, this is what we call risk tolerance from low to high, all right? It's the maximum degree of uncertainty someone or a company is willing to accept when making a decision that entails the probability of a loss, all right? And so you'll see something on the Y-axis called risk viewpoint, and there's two elements. On the bottom of the Y-axis is risk averse. That means minimizing or totally avoiding any risk that can produce a loss. And it's essentially on the lower portion of the Y-axis, everyone in that category tends to look at risk as a negative. You want to avoid it. On the top portion of the Y-axis, something a little different. These are the folks who think about risk from an opportunity point of view, meaning one company's risk event can be another company's risk opportunity. And then finally on the X-axis, we have risk management decision tactics. These are the tactics that tend to support the specific risk perspectives that you see in the graph. They are from left to right. We do nothing, meaning when a risk comes, we react. Loss control, that's a different approach. Risk steering in the middle, diversifying, and then accepting risk. And Jim is going to give you some detailed definitions so that you can get grounded on both the perspectives, which are the ovals, and the tactics, which are supporting those ovals. So now I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. So let's start with the ovals, those four perspectives that you see here. The pragmatist, which is this brown or light orange. These are procrastinators. They wait until the last minute to make a risk decision, holding on to their options open to the very last moment, basically reactive. The conservators here, the next oval here is blue. This perspective is driven by caution. Mitigating a loss is paramount to risk decision making. And the biggest concern about avoiding a loss is being very careful to avoid risk to the bottom line. And in essence, the conservators are trying to protect the P&L very often. Then you move to managers. And managers, which is this light turquoise color, this perspective takes a very balanced scorecard approach to risk. We're trying to be careful to balance risk and rewards and utilize as many tools and techniques to quantify those risks. And then you have the maximizers. And the maximizers are in this light blue, big risk, big rewards. They go for the gusto, very proactive. This perspective looks at risk as the opportunity and competitive differentiation. Maximizers are willing to accept a big risk for big reward. Show me the money. Proactive with solid risk mitigation tactics. So those are the four perspectives. And just to note here, some companies are purely acting as pragmatists, and some companies might be between pragmatist and conservator and so forth. And we'll cover that in a few minutes. But through the many years of discussion with clients, we found that there's two attributes that define your risk perspective. First, number one, your personal risk experience, those events that you have encountered and had to deal with. And then number two, your current position in the company. So are you in procurement, you're in operations, your risk perspective is going to be different. Again, there's no right or wrong as far as the company is concerned, because overall, all of these different organizations are acting and engaging in your risk decisions as this common risk decision perspective. So again, it's a combination of all those key stakeholders' perspectives across the supply chain, including manufacturing, procurement, logistics, supply chain, finance, and marketing. All these stakeholders will have a different perspective, but the overall organization has an agreed upon collaborative risk decision tactic to form your overall risk perspective. So next, we'll go through the risk decision tactics. Those elements on the bottom here, these stages of doing nothing, lost control, risk steering, and diversifying and risk acceptance. So let's start with do nothing. Simply stated, you're not doing anything. It's all ad hoc approach to risk when they arise. No formal process. Deciding not to decide can be construed as a decision. The next is lost control. And that's most traditional form of risk management driven by consensus. And then in the middle here, now you're at the middle of this x-axis and risk steering. And here we're driven by rigorous analysis. So we're moving into that phase. And we are looking at cost, benefit, and risk reward approach, rigorous analysis, and a true ERM approach, enterprise risk management approach. And we attempt to discover and implement a balance. And then as we move to diversifying, once that the steering has been achieved, we are now moving into the realm of the risk across multiple classes to mitigate. And you really spreading the exposure across the various classes of risk to mitigate the loss. And here we're maximizing flexibility and minimizing exposure. So now we're using more of a shared risk tactic. And then as we move to risk acceptance, now you're getting into these complicated modeling analysis, risk reward, profit and loss. And these are the exemplars that are masters at taking on risk as an opportunity to outmaneuver the competition and capitalize on times when risks are high. So remember, there's no really right or wrong here. They are all different. In the end, it's just the perspective of the company or organization that makes a difference. We've built these risk perspectives and tactics on hypothesis and are hoping to enhance these as we move through this program. And the tool will identify your risk appetite for your company and position your risk profile on the top of this graph. So with that, we move to another question on what type of risk tactics are you taking today? Are you taking any of these? Are you in loss control, risk steering, diversifying, risk acceptance? Which risk perspective best personifies your? And while you're typing in there, I'll look at the Q&A. There seems to be a question.
Yeah, it's from Dimitri. So perhaps after this, we could entertain that question.
Okay.
If you can see it.
I see from Peter, an organization has different internal views on risk. Is there an approach to gain alignment and agreed upon risk appetite and resulting strategies? From Peter. So I think that's what we espouse, is getting all those parties in the room I think they have the Delphi method, Greg, that you often
Yep.
talk about. Do you want to answer that question? Go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, we do. The variation or variability in different perspectives, I think we've shared that with you. You're going to get that, and we look for that. We actually look for that with our clients because we know that's going to happen. What you can do with those varying degrees and different perspectives, you can use a Delphi method where you have a facilitator, you get folks in the conference room, and essentially you go around the room and discuss that risk and everyone's opinion. And then essentially you are trying to get to a consensus associated with that particular risk that is identified. Another way to do it is using RPN, Risk Priority Numbering System, coming out of Six Sigma. All right, we utilize that. There's another method to assess the risk, and that's by data. We like to do both. We like to do both the qualitative, which is getting people's opinions, and then going through, let's say, a dialogue and deliberation about why they feel that way in terms of that particular perspective on risk. And then there's another way to do it with RPN, where you have a ranking from 1 to 5, then you go through the Delphi method again and you start to synthesize and homogenize. Then there's a quantitative way where you can use the data, meaning the data from your systems associated with calculating what we call value at risk. Because remember, we like to do them both. Folks, people have opinions, all right? Data has no opinion. So we like to do both qualitative and quantitative and then compare the two results from an assessment point of view about the same risks. And then that poses a pretty interesting and lively discussion. Just to give you a little thumbnail sketch. I'm not sure if you have any answers.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Well, there you go.
Holy mackerel.
Excellent.
Wow, that is like somebody typed in something very quickly.
Terrific.
That's fantastic.
That's very encouraging.
Yeah. Fast typer. I love it. Yeah. So I'm not sure what aircraft means. You know what that means, Greg?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm not sure.
All right. I want to essentially voice Dimitri's question as well before we potentially move on. I guess Dimitri was saying, would you say that doing nothing as a tactic is similar to risk acceptance? How would you drive the differentiation for the stakeholder for clarity? All right. I'll try it first, Dimitri. When we say nothing, it's like totally ad hoc, meaning we don't talk, we don't discuss risk. It's just all hands on deck. Holy cow, we have a risk event. What do? You line the troops up. You do the best you can. You have no protocol. You have no methodologies, and there's no guarantee that you will exit in a positive way because you don't have any methodology. Risk acceptance from a tactic point of view, from a technology and methodology point of view, says, I understand what RPN is. I understand what value at risk is. I understand how to assess my risk. I know what risk reward methodology is. I know what cost benefit algorithms I have, and I will go through and calculate both quality and quantity, and we will come up with, we'll render an informed decision based on the methodologies we have and the protocol. And we would advocate that that is probably inherently a higher probability of mitigating that particular risk than essentially all hands on deck 24/7 and you get what you get. That's my best, a kind of a bifurcated answer.
Well, keep those questions coming. Thanks for your participation in this Wordle, and we'll move on to the next slide and pick up some more questions in a minute. So now we're talking, we're really looking at positioning the risk appetite persona for your organization. And of course, this involves this cross-organization, cross-functional organization, supply chain team responding to these perspectives. And sometimes, quite honestly, just getting this cross-functional team in a room together and getting them to talk to each other is a challenge. But, you know, as we said, you know, the responses create, you know, the data in the survey. We have those different personas across the organization entering in their responses. And we will look at when there's alignment and misalignment in those responses. So the data actually creates the oval here using our algorithms, and that explanation on why we believe where you are is based on those responses given by the participants. And so gaining insight from all these stakeholders is critical in gaining the insight of what the organization's risk appetite is. And as far as insightful characteristic traits, you know, we have 4 of them. First, your approach to risk and reward, how your team makes risk decisions, balancing risk and rewards for proactively or reactively addressing these decisions. Secondly, the metrics, KPIs, and key risk indicators, we like to call them KRIs, that you utilize to make decisions. So how far you are in the maturity will be very much aligned to you moving to using KRIs in your decision making. And then thirdly, the technologies to support SC&R, those technologies that you may leverage to support your resiliency efforts, and then your industry risk propensities, comparing how you react to these risk decisions relative to your industry partners and competitors. In summary, some companies would fall entirely on one of these areas, but others may fall between. So you may find that your oval comes out in like what is being shown. So, but overall, in the transitioning, most companies move from pragmatists to conservative to managers and to maximizers. Rarely would you jump from a pragmatist to a maximizer right off the bat. But there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's just what we've seen over the last 10 years. Greg, anything else to add on this?
No, it's pretty good. It's there again. Remember, there is no right or wrong answer here. It's essentially a positioning approach to essentially understand, and this is the key. The reason we harp and dig deep on this is if you are a supply chain risk manager, that's your new title, you have a project, you need to understand, as a quote unquote change agent for risk management, you need to understand what your company's tentative risk appetite is. You need to understand that. We are trying to provide insight in terms of making sure that you are aware of the risk appetite and the tactics that your organization tends to utilize to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks. That's why we do this.
So I just got the chance to read Peter's note. He said aircraft was me. He was describing the position as moving to a maximizer in the aerospace market in anticipation of a surge, sustained return to demand for air travel. So yeah, well, that's a great, Peter, thank you. That's a very interesting scenario that you're laying out. Yeah, so for the airlines are certainly going through this, and as they take things out of mothballs for the last 6-8 months, and they're starting to go out, they're trying to maximize, but they're trying to probably play two of these ovals where they in the past may have been more conservator in the past, and now they're trying to maximize. They're trying to jump. Maybe that's an interesting discussion point, that if you do have a jolt in the way that your business and your demand, you might be looking to jump from where you're at today, or maybe they're managers and they jump to maximizer, and sometimes that doesn't always work out because you're entering a world of taking on risks that had not been taking before, as you try to move to the right on decision tactics. That's my take on it. Greg, your take on that?
No, I think we, in the spirit of time, we want to make sure we finish up the rest of the closing slides for you.
Okay, so the value proposition, again, as we've said a few times, there's no good or bad. Don't be concerned if your company has multiple risk perspectives. That's to be expected. It'd be kind of strange if it didn't happen. And you as a supply chain project lead need to understand the different risk perspectives across the company and take those into account. And as a role of that, being that project lead, and then you want to provide those risk constraints and tolerances as your roll out the journey of supply chain risk and resiliency. And therefore, risk appetite is essential to the success in your supply chain risk and resiliency journey. So with that, we're going to close it out into, the compelling reasons to act. Again, our 90-day action plan, 90 questions, taking 20 minutes, producing that 90-day action plan that is prescriptive for you and your organization. And right now we are offering this at $500. Our list price will be $3,500 once it rolls out and we are completed with the beta. We are starting to get a number of betas in, so that will probably close out at the end of May. And Greg, close it out.
Yep, we just wanted to finish up strong with kind of a sense of what you get and what we're asking for. So again, here's what you get. You get a sense of where your company is in our supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model. Now, we've talked about the model historically and did a deep dive in previous webinars. All right, but we're now comfortable being able to position a company based on the answers to the questions in terms of where you are. You also get a sense of who you are relative to the risk appetite, which is what we did a deep dive on today. All right. You also get an aligned 90-day action plan, as Jim mentioned, to survive and thrive during COVID-19 and beyond. So we're taking all these elements into effect and attempting to give you a set of action items over the next 90 days to either start the journey and or move the journey forward, move the lever forward. So you'll get to learn how to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks, and why. Why do we advocate this? Knowing sooner and acting faster than your nearest competitor, that's a strategic advantage to the bottom line. A bonus effect or a bonus benefit for every company in the beta arena, in the beta stage, that provide 5 or more executives filling out the survey on our learning management platform, we will offer your company 1 free pass to our supply chain risk and resiliency online course. It's been out there for 2 years. That's a value of about $1,400, and that includes a certificate from Lehigh University. So that's the get. This is the ask. And we're just reiterating here, 5 to 8 executives, independent insight. We want that variability. We want that different perspective. Going to take you 20 to 30 minutes. We're looking for, if you're a manufacturer, these are the types of departments and disciplines we're looking for to get that diversity in terms of risk perspective and so forth. And then essentially the last pillar, the last ask, is we would like executives answering this survey to be aligned with the same division or product line. We'd like to have individuals and execs in somewhat of a homogeneous arena, as opposed to someone in one division in a conglomerate and someone in another, just for the sake of clarity and classification. So those are more or less the asks. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
So when we have a closeout question to you is that, if you could provide your challenges that you may encounter in promoting this online action plan on what we need to do differently in rolling this out, please feel free to enter that in here and or follow up with Greg and I so that we can best serve you and providing you the best solution. But in the interest of time, since we're a few minutes over the hour, I think we'll allow that to be follow-up questions. And just to close out today, again, we'll thank you for joining the EIG webinar series. We have webinars on, again, coming up on May 11th on operational propensity. On this series, we have another webinar series on rapid skills deployment. And then we move into new product introduction, speed and resiliency. The next webinar is on agile sprints on May the 4th. And then we have artificial intelligence webinar coming up on April 27th on video to insight. And then on the 29th, we have a digital twin webinar. And then we are also having some new partners come in, Impetus and MyGamba, talking about hyper automation and simplifying operational excellence. So again, we are aligned to people, process, data, and technology. And this is a quick list of our partners. And Greg and I thank you very much for joining us today. And it is through leveraging of each other that we become better and more resilient. As we close, Greg, do you have any closing comments?
No, just basically, thanks a lot for attending. And remember, we have our final deep dive associated with the major elements of this tool, I believe in May. I think it's what, May 11th? Is that true, Jim?
Yeah, I just announced it.
Okay. Yep. I mean, that'll be a deep dive in operational propensity. And that ought to be a very interesting, a little bit of culture there as well. So just so you know, just remember. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.